Hello and welcome to today's Astranti bite-sized video. Now today we're going to be talking about the subject of human resource planning, which is part of the broader subject of just human resources. And in a moment I'm going to pass you over to my colleague who's going to be talking through the stages of the human resource plan, and with a focus on how it would work through a proposed fictional company, Joe's Doll Factory. So I'll just pass you over to him now.
Here we're going to be looking at the HR plan, and I'm just going to bring up a toy doll on screen for you because this is representative of Joe. Now Joe isn't the doll. Joe is the MD of a company that makes hand assembled dolls. Now, in addition to the admin, the sales and the marketing staff, he also currently employs 100 people to work on the assembly lines in his factory. The really good news for Joe is that his newest doll, Sam, has been reported on news websites as the must-have toy of the year. That's great news for Joe's company, and orders from retailers for Christmas are coming in fast. It's also been predicted on the back of Sam's popularity that the planned Jack doll that Joe's company is going to launch soon is also going to be a bestseller too. So Joe realizes he's moving into a period of time when he's going to have to increase productivity, and he understands that he needs to recruit another 50 doll assemblers to make sure that all his future orders can be fulfilled. So Joe is going to have to consult his HR team to formulate an HR plan to make sure that all his production targets are met. Now, it's really important for an organization to have a good HR plan in place that is developed in line with an organization's strategic plan. Now, successful adherence to the plan will support the organization in achieving its objectives. Now, the HR plan should include a wide variety of information, going from the recruitment of the staff, looking at how staff are trained to make sure they're most efficient, making sure that staff are well motivated because well motivated staff are more productive, also making sure that the HR plan accounts for any shortages in staff and how they're going to be covered, and also if there's any surplus in staff, if there's too many members of staff for what they need to produce, what is the organisation going to do? And that should all be laid out in the HR plan. So for example, with regards to our last point, let's imagine that an organisation is going through a period of inactivity. Staff then may have to be made redundant. Or, like we're seeing with Joe, if there's a sudden spike in production, then staff shortages are going to have to be covered. Now, systematic planning is designed to achieve optimum output of a company's most important asset, which is its staff. Now, human resource plans tend to cover periods of 3 to 5 years and have to be revisited and updated regularly to make sure that the HR plan stays in line with the changing business environments, covers any new company goals, as well as taking into account the economic climate. Now, the number of stages in an HR plan can vary from about 3 to 10, but what we're going to do is break down the plan into 5 stages. And we're going to go through each one of these stages one at a time, and it makes sense to begin at number 1 of stages of the HR plan, which is assessing the current workforce. So why are we starting at assessing the current workforce? I've already talked about how HR is all about recruiting. Surely it makes sense for the HR plan to start with recruiting, getting the staff in. Well, of course, before an organisation can even think about recruitment, it has to make sure that it understands the number of employees that it already has, the skill set of the current employees, because there's no good going off recruiting people and training people if the current staff already have the relevant skill set. It should also be aware of the qualifications and the performance levels of the current staff in relation to the strategic plan. So what this then can be used for is to decide if an employee can potentially take on more responsibility and move into a more senior role. And it's also going to highlight any knowledge and training gaps which could be needed for future operations. So let's say, for example, our last point here says relating to a strategic plan. Well, let's say at Joe's doll factory, for example, he's decided to move away from making dolls and has decided to make a new kind of toy. Well, actually, his current staff may not have the skill set to do this. And so, obviously, after assessing the current workforce, the HR may have to recruit staff with the skills needed for the new strategic plan. Or perhaps they need to make sure there's training in place to cover any knowledge gaps for the new strategic plan. Now, at this stage, stage number 1, the audit of internal staff should consider staff turnover. So, for example, are a group of people about to retire, for example? Whether staff are able or willing to work overtime, what's going to happen in periods of inactivity and staff absenteeism through sickness, maternity leave, paternity leave, all that kind of stuff. Now, Joe has identified in his staff audit, in his stage 1 of the HR plan, that the company typically loses 10% of its factory staff every year through retirement and staff migration. Now, he takes on seasonal staff that are only needed during the summer months to prepare for the Christmas period. So they're busy preparing the Christmas inventory, and this is going to leave a shortfall for the rest of the year when working on the new project. So that's where Joe is in stage 1 of the HR plan. Let's move on to stage 2 of the HR plan, which is considering the future workforce. So in this stage, the future strategic goals of the organization are used as a baseline. So HR are going to ask a variety of questions in this stage. So for example, what skills are people going to need for the strategic goals to be completed? How many staff are needed for the strategic goals to be completed? And are any people due for promotions to move into those more senior roles? And of course, this is just carrying on from what we talked about in stage 1, just making sure that there's staff in place for the organisation to be able to hit their goals. Now, Joe has identified he's going to need 30 new assemblers, 15 packers and 5 supervisors. Now, with the predicted popularity of the new Jack doll, Joe and the production line manager estimate that an additional 30 new assemblers, 15 packers and 5 supervisors are going to be needed over the next 12 months. Now, in the short term, in order to fulfill orders, Joe could look to overtime. He'll have to ask the opinions of his current workforce to see if they would like to do this, though. He can then factor this into his plan. Now, if we think about the last point in relation to Joe's question as well, he might think, well, seems a bit strange. Why do we need to consider whether any promotions are due in this stage? Well, we've just seen, haven't we, that Joe estimates that he's going to need 5 new supervisors. Well, what he's going to do is see whether any members of staff can step up into that supervisory role. If they can, great, he can promote them. But of course, that's going to impact on the amount of assemblers and packers he has as well. So here, Joe is just identifying who is able to take what roles, and is he going to have to recruit or train any people to make sure the strategic goals are going to be hit. Now, other elements to consider at this stage are any external changes that are going to occur. So, for example, in the UK between 2016 and 2019, there were a high level of uncertainty for companies whilst the details of Brexit were being discussed. Now, this uncertainty may have affected decisions regarding offering promotions abroad and recruitment of European staff to work in the UK until the effect on the exchange rate or the visa work permit requirements were known. So here, we're just thinking about the external environment. Okay, let's move on to step number 3. Now, this is something we've mentioned when looking at the other two, and this is analysing any gaps. Been assessing the current workforce, we've been taking that assessment and looking against any future workforce, and now in stage 3, an organisation is going to look at its current position and compare where it needs to be in the future. Now, by doing this, HR are able to identify any gaps in the skills, the job roles, and the management. Existing HR practices can also be reviewed at this stage to make sure they are useful and in line with a strategy to achieve goals. Now, training, overtime schedules, transfers and promotions can be identified and planned in conjunction with the finance department. Now, another important part of this stage is to determine pay scales, bonuses, and any other areas of compensation for staff. And this makes sense, doesn't it? So we're finding our gap here. Once we know what we need as an organization, then we can put the rest of the structure into place. We can work out the pay scales, the bonuses, because at this stage we kind of know what every role is needed and whether there are people to fill those roles. Now, Joe is aware that with all the new staff coming on board, he's going to have to prepare a training schedule. He's going to identify and assess current members of staff that have the relevant skill set to move on into supervisory and management positions. And he's also going to have to liaise with the finance department regarding salaries, bonus options, and reward systems. So this stage is basically taking what we've learnt from the previous two stages and then just taking it on to the next stage. Okay, stage number 4 is integrating the plan into company. So we've got all this information. Now it's possible for an organization to see whether any adjustments can be made so as to close any gaps in staff resources. So, for example, promoting staff to management positions, booking internal and external training, and scheduling overtime to cover any shortfalls and more. Now, where gaps still remain, exploring the external environment to recruit more staff should be considered. Conversely, should it be discovered that there are too many staff, this is where redundancy and recruitment freezes and changes to working patterns can be implemented. So this is just about making sure everything we've learned so far in the stages works for the company and making it real. So, for example, with Joe now has a full picture of where his doll company currently is in terms of its staff, and also has a full breakdown of his future workforce needs, So here, he can start to put a plan into place with the HR team to prepare for internal succession, recruitment, and training needs alongside the finance functions budgets. And then we move on to our 5th stage, which is appraise and review. So this is looking at the effectiveness of the plan. And this should be done continuously to make sure the company's objectives are always being achieved. As human capital is perhaps the most inconsistent and unpredictable resource, it's vital for HR plans to be flexible and comprehensive. So Joe needs to revisit the plan throughout the next year to make sure that staffing levels have been met and that all training needs have been catered for. Now, it's possible that you recruit some workers who don't need training, whilst others may be best placed to go straight into a supervisory role. Consultation with the finance department over expenditure is going to be needed because budgets for salaries and training may be exceeded due to training caused price rises, for example. Now, with a solid plan in place, Joe should be able to fulfill all the new orders and launch the new doll without too many staffing issues. So there we go. That's our 5 stages of human resourcing planning.
And I hope that that has been an informative and useful video for you. It's terribly useful if you're going to be studying CIMA E1 or E2, because they're both relevant subjects, and even up to E3, and of course anything for your case studies, because it's relevant knowledge to see how an organisation is likely to work in terms of its human resources. And if you'd like to see more videos like this or more on this subject, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel, like the video please, and of course you can go to Astranti's actual website where we've got all sorts of videos for E1, E2, E3 and all the other subjects of CIMA. Thank you for watching.